Ahoy game makers, today's advice is just to visualize things, and I'll show some examples of what I'm talking about in a bit. So often when you're building games, things can get very abstract. You have to think about all sorts of just variables and stuff, and it can get all rather overwhelming and hard to get a handle on what's going on. And a great shortcut to this, and this relates to just writing things down and drawing yourself diagrams of things as well, is just to visualize things, whether it's on paper or in a computer document or what have you. So let me give an example. When I was first designing the big enemies for Super Space Galaxy, I wanted to make a set of new enemies, and I had to think about which planets they'd be assigned to and how many different types there'd be and where their guns would go and all this stuff. And I ended up making a Paint.net project that included the graphics, and yeah, these are the Tyrian graphics that are free. And you just visualize for yourself what the guns might look like, and then you can imagine much better how they might play and everything. You shouldn't feel like a visual scheme like this is too restrictive either, because I did draw up some kind of plan for the 6 new big enemies, but in the end none of the 6 worked exactly the way I did in the diagrams, but it was still really useful to visualize this stuff up and just make some possibilities at least about how they could work. One reason this is so effective might be because apparently there's a lot of connections between the eye and the brain, and people are very visual creatures. And I gotta admit, I did a philosophy degree and I'm fairly rationalistic myself. I am loath to stoop to empiricism, but even I have to admit that this works exceedingly well. Another big advantage of visualizing things can be that you find it a lot easier to relate where things are in a layout, or just how things relate to each other. So for this, for instance, I had to assign enemies to different planet types, and if you just make a list of what the planet types are, and you've got a list of the enemies, you can actually just position them over each other and figure out where things are in kind of a diagram, and you just see which planets have someone associated with them and which don't, and what have you, and it's just all laid out a lot more clearly than having to, even having to write it down sometimes. The same thing definitely applies to how I handle the tiles in Super Space Galaxy, because for a long time I was just winging it, figuring out how tiles and maps and things could be generated at all. But this only really became efficient and reliable when I did a proper visual scheme of how tiles worked and what the exact conditions for each tile type were. And now that I've got that, I can stick to it as well. So I find that when you visualize something, it becomes an awful lot easier just to program it in and obey your own visualizations. This even works for stuff that you might think is really easy, like you might think you've got a good UI layout for some menu, or it's kind of obvious how the menu is supposed to be laid out. But even just drawing, I don't know, 3 squares on a piece of paper is probably better than just trying to think of your menu layout yourself, and that goes double if you've got a few competing layouts. Like if you're not sure how best to lay out some information on the page or what information you want, just create some mock-ups of the different possibilities, and you'll probably find that a lot more of the relationships start to emerge obviously in front of you. I should say I use Paint.net all the time. My image editing stuff doesn't tend to be that sophisticated, but Paint.net is free. You can download a bunch of plugins for it that make it more useful, that help you align objects and things, and it's a decent little package that lets you at least arrange pixely graphics like the kind I have in Super Space Galaxy really well. Anyway, so there you have it. If you want to plan out some ideas, even if it's just some menu layouts, or weapons you want to try out, or characters, or anything pretty much, you can plan it out by visualizing it. Start with just making some circles, shooting some other circles if you have to, or find some sprites to stand in for the things you want to make, and just arrange them onto a page somewhere, and even a really crappy visualization is going to be better than just thinking about it in your head and trying to figure out how things fit together, really. But this goes double if you want to compare one visualization to another. I've given this advice to a client recently. So visualize things and things will become clearer. Most indie game devs never finish their game. Why? No structure, no accountability, and no support. That's why I'm opening 5 private coaching spots to help devs get unstuck and finally finish their game. message me game plan in my Discord and let's chat.